Okay, so in this section, we are going to be looking at labor and work. Labor is, of course, one of the most fundamental institutions in our society. And if we go back to Marx's ideas about capitalism and economic inequality, we might also remember that Marx thought that work is essential. It's actually the essence of human beings. It's what makes us human, is that we create the things that we need. Um, And of course, in our society, access to what we need is done through work, through wage labor. But more than that, work is also part of our identity. Many of us um, think of work as part of who we are. So work is a pretty fundamental institution in our society. This begs the question then of why people are so worried about us not working. Um, so many Social Security programs that protect us when we are out of work. These have been beefed up substantially due to the massive unemployment that's come through this pandemic. Um, but all of these unemployment uh, insurance packages have limits, have conditions that have increased over the years. Even things like Medicaid and health insurance have work requirements. The idea being apparently that if we get free insurance, we won't try to find a job. And indeed, this is a pretty common narrative that if we didn't have to work, most of us wouldn't. Even though, as we've just stated, work is pretty essential to who we are. Many of us may be finding this out if our employment has been furloughed or canceled and we're stuck at home and have little to do with ourselves. We don't know what to do. People get cabin fever in part because work gives us purpose, direction, and motivation. And so this kind of begs the question of what's the deal with all these people trying to put work requirements on things and the concern about people not working if they don't have to, that people are just lazy and indifferent to work. So the problems of labor that we'll dig into in this section relate to these attitude towards work um, and how we think of some jobs as good and bad, but also the role work plays in our daily lives. We're going to look momentarily at the kind of work we do, thinking as well about what's a good job and a bad job. We're going to think about who has access to work and different kinds of work, how labor markets function today. And we're going to think about power over and in work. Can we control what we do? Can we control our work process? And who has power over whether we work and do not? So, for much of our history, human beings have worked in agriculture, farming. We worked out in the fields. We mostly made what we need. And as you can see from this graph from the wonderful site Our World in Data, most human societies have been employed in agriculture throughout their histories. So this is for much of our whole society, this is how we did work. This is how we made what we need. We worked in the fields, we farmed, we raised cattle. But that's obviously declined substantially in the last 100 years as we've shifted to different kinds of work. Today, many of us will work in what we call the services sector. Many fewer of us will work in agriculture and manufacturing. You'll notice that most of our labor force doesn't work in manufacturing, though that wasn't always the case. Today, most of us will work in some sort of service work. This might be a high-end service work, like being a professor or doing legal matters or doing taxes for people. Or it can be what we call lower end service work, flipping burgers and stocking shelves. Both of those are services. That means that they're not out in the field and we're not in a factory. We're creating a service. One of the key problems with this changing nature of work is that for the higher end service jobs, more and more credentialization and education is needed. This is so at a time where the cost of education is rising at an extraordinarily rapid rate. It's more expensive now to get a degree than it has been at any point in history. So access to those higher paying, fancier type service jobs is increasingly limited to those who can afford it or those who can afford to take on the debt. All right, so next we're going to think a little bit more about the kind of work we do, but I want you to participate in the discussion board and think about what kind of work is essential, what kind of work is valuable in our society, and why are some jobs seen as more and less important.